Hello, it's Bargo. Welcome to another course of Teachin. This series is all about PVE, how it works and why it works that way. You may notice that is in a once in a blue moon site that I am not on my Magblade. It's because this is a bit of a two-part, or an introduction to a tanking. I'm still going to have the tank and life course if I can help it on sometime during the week. But this one is mostly about like a precursor to tanking. So that video is going to go over things like attributes, skills, sets, attitudes, coordination, the difference between a selfish and a supportive tank, why it's important to have, why for series veteran content it's important to have those 3 sets of jewelry, why balanced tanks are used so much over magic or regen tanks, and stuff like that. This one is more of just a bare bones intro to tanking. It's not going to go over any of those in full. It's just going to be like light touches on those. This one is just more about like the bare bones. So it's going to be, what is tanking? Like, how do you tank? Or what is ESO tanking compared to other games? How do you level a tank properly? What are the jobs of a tank? And then what are the differences between the build authors? Like, why does no one recommend Zynode for tanking? Why is this guy so much better than this guy in the eyes of tanks who do veteran content, and stuff like that. So that's just what this video is going to be about. And let's, before I roll right into it, I just want to say thank you very much to my friends Doc and Mumbles, Doc Amadeo and Mumbles McFaddy. They helped a whole lot with this video because I am not the greatest tank, and they were very patient with the very many questions I had, so big thank you to you dudes. Yeah, rolling into what is tanking ESO? I'm going to be using WoW as an example. As a preface, I have never played WoW. Maybe you are a WoW tank and you're going to be listening to this and going like, what is she even talking about? I've only gotten this information from friends, and then a lot of my own like kind of homework online looking at how WoW tanking worked. So WoW tanking seemed to be based around the threat system. You keep the threat up, a rotation similar to a DPS, using certain skills that generate a lot of threat. If you weren't doing enough damage, the threat would go to to a damage dealer, so they had to cut down their DPS or you had to put out more. ESO tanking isn't really like that. Like, our version of a threat system in ESO is just the taunts. You have Pierce Armor, which is the good morph of puncture for a tank, that's 15 seconds, and they have Inner Fire, which is also 15 seconds. Pierce Armor is your melee taunt, Inner Fire is your range taunt. It's kind of how it goes. It might seem a bit boring at first, because like, hey, you don't have to do your DPS rotation to actually keep up your taunt, like you just have to click that button and your DPS can go ham. But that's also kind of like how ESO supporting is in general, it seems. Especially if you only do normal content, like for veteran content the difference is very much there. But tanking at a veteran level, or at a level aimed for veteran content, is going to give you the power, because you have a lot of buffs and debuffs available to you as a tank. Like, you have the Ebon Armory set, you have Alkosh, you have Lord Warden, you have Taurogs, you have Dragon Guard, you have all these kinds of sets, and then you have skills like Dragonite's got Engulfing, Templar's got Power of the Light, Warden's got Green Balance stuff, Necro's got Necro stuff, and just stuff like that. Like, every tank, even if it's not built into their kit, every tank has some form of buff and debuff they can bring to the table. That's one of the fun parts about tanking, because honestly, like, you are very much a wall, with a taunt, but also a lot of buffs and debuffs. Like, you have Regressive Warhorn, stuff like that, that's just aimed at helping you buff and debuff the group while still being comfortable enough to, like, tank things. And speaking of tanking and taunting, another thing that's different about ESO is that there is no AoE taunt. This might seem a bit weird, especially if you come from a game with an AoE taunt, but ESO's taunts are all single target. And it doesn't seem like that's going to change anytime soon. Like, I don't think they're going to add in an AoE taunt anytime soon. But they can be used very effectively. Like, learning ad management without an AoE taunt is one of the most fun and rewarding parts of tanking, because you get to see yourself learning to control the fight. So like for trials, you can, trials with 2 tanks or maybe even 3 tanks, you coordinate with your fellow tanks on where to put things. You get to learn which ads are most important to taunt, which ads get set where. It's just stuff like that. Like, you learn to control the fight with the single target taunt, and it just feels very rewarding, especially when you know, like, especially if you start getting compliments on your tanking stuff. As if you're a DPS watching this video, very nice to compliment your tanks on their stacking and stuff. Yeah. Tanking and healing in ESO are both like kind of tip of the iceberg kind of things. Like tanking seems very boring. Taunt it, turn around, just kind of stand there. Healing is just heal them up. But both have a lot of things in their kit that they can use to help buff the group DPS. Not always by doing DPS themselves, but sometimes just be like, or a lot of the time just like buffing your team throughout the resources available to you. But most of this applies to being a level 50 tank already, like the ad management bit and trials and stuff like that. You can't really get there if you don't have a level tank. So the next bit about leveling a tank is just going to be like how I feel and how some of my tank friends feel that probably the best way to level a tank is. Like you don't need to go just level as a DPS, maybe like all medium armor, stuff like that. You can level as a tank and still have some bars that are like kind of DPS-y. But you want to make sure that you have the essentials going, which would be level your heavy armor, level the skills that you need, level your guilds, level your alliance war, level your sword and board and your destro staff. And this kind of plays into like just wear 3 to 4 pieces of medium armor, class damage skills, maybe like if you have training armor, just wear, or not just wear, wear like a DPS-y kind of set alongside a tanky set. Maybe like 4-piece Death's Wind or Fortified Brass alongside something like Night Mother's Gaze, like 5-piece Fortified, 4-piece Night Mothers, even though Fortified isn't really the best set. And then just like have a general idea of the skills and the skill lines that you want as a tank. So like as an example, Dragonite, one of the most overlooked skills for Dragonite is Engulfing Flames. This is super important for veteran content with Magicka DPS, because that flame damage buff, 10% may not seem that much, but it's absolutely wicked DPS increase for your Magicka DPS. So it's important to keep in mind, like, hey, it's important to keep in mind the impact that your buffs and debuffs can have, and like just kind of keep in mind. So like another one would be Warden's green balance skills, which are passed over a little bit because like you don't really need healing as a tank, it may seem, but then Warden is just super. It's important to have those skills and those passives as a Warden tank, and it's just similar things to that for all classes. Then get some farming done below 50 as well. Like farm your alliance points in below 50 for your things like Vigor, Warhorn, Purge, Guard, Barrier, stuff like that. Farm them in below 50 if you can, or farm them up in below 50. You get XP for it for battlegrounds. You get AP. People are usually less coordinated in there, so you don't have to worry about getting bulldozed by a BG specific team. Do your Mages Guild, your Fighters Guild, and your Undaunted along the way. These are the main things I would suggest for any tank. Fighters Guild, because its passives are useful to every role. Like Banish the Wicked is really nice for ultimate generation. Still Release is really nice for tanking classes that don't have an inbuilt pull, like Dragonite has Grip. Dragonite has Chains, Warden has their kind of janky portal, Necro's got Summoner Armor, or Beckoning Armor, whatever you call it. But still Release is real helpful. You also have things like Circle of Protection from Fighters Guild that just make it helpful. Mages Guild is super important because a lot of veteran-based tank builds, or at least the good veteran-based tank builds, use balance in their builds. Balance or spell symmetry, depending. This is real important to being a balanced tank because it's in the name. It's just real important to even if you aren't going to be a balanced tank in the foreseeable future, maybe you just want to start as a mag regen and then move into a balanced tank, it's still good to have that Mages Guild going, because while you're gathering Sky Shards and stuff, you're going to be passing by the lore books anyways. Undaunted is real important, because like the Undaunted command passive right here is super important for all roles. DPS and tank are the main ones that benefit. Then you have Undaunted Metal for max stuff. You need your Inner Fire, which is your ranged hunt. You got your Blood Altar, you got your Bone Shield. If you're running in a Bobo stamina group, you're probably going to want Trapping Webs for spiders. You might want Orb for certain scenarios. Citric is another one. It's a little more niche for Dragonite tanks specifically, but for like all tanking things, it's nice to have. It on hand because the skills there are useful. Like Meditate for certain scenarios. Slotting the ultimate for Temporal Guard for the passive minor protection is also very nice on classes other than Warden. Asking around to check on like the important skills to keep in mind as you level. 3 to 4 medium pieces, class damage skills, blue CP and a damage spec will help too, so instead of like the tanking CP I have on, or the kind of mishmash tanking CP I have on right now, you put more points into mastered arms, physical weapons, these four, sorry, I can count. And then once you hit 50, respec your CP back into a tanking thing, or into a tanking thing. Yeah, that's probably kind of like the most efficient, maybe it's not like the fastest way to level a tank. Things in the overland are going to take longer to die, but honestly, like, I would say that things taking longer to die is a bit of a small price to pay to make sure that you're leveling the right skills. Yeah, the next thing to go over would be just like tanking playstyles too, because that impacts a lot of how you level a tank and play a tank. Like, talking about buffing and debuffing isn't really important if you only intend to tank normal stuff. Like, maybe you won't have a tank that you only want to do normal dungeons in. It doesn't really matter. You can tank that on a DPS. Like, just build a chunky DPS for that. But for something like veteran content, or just like normal trials, veteran dungeons, veteran DLC dungeons, veteran arenas, and veteran trials, you want very much to be the buffy-debuffy tank. Dungeon and trials tanking differs a little bit, because with trials tanking you are oftentimes coordinating with your fellow tank. Like, hey, I'm going to wear Evan, you can wear something else. Maybe we're both in Alkosh. Maybe you guys have to coordinate between who's taking what and like when to take the boss off each other. That's an important part of trials tanking and learning to do it. Coordinating with your fellow tank, maybe with your healers, to make sure that they know that, hey, you need heals, maybe you need more resources, maybe you want to know like, hey, where can I put this to make it easier for the group, and just stuff like that. Whereas dungeons tanking is similar to that, minus the communication between the other tank. Oftentimes in dungeons tanking, sometimes you do build chunkier, especially for hard modes in veteran DLC dungeons, because like you only have one healer, maybe you don't even have a healer if if you're running with a bunch of mad lads, in a 3 DPS comp, 3 DPS 1 tank, so you might build chunkier in dungeons compared to trials. And stuff like that. It all bleeds into that Swiss Army knife tanking playstyle, Swiss Army support playstyle, where you have a whole lot at your disposal to use, like maybe bunches of jewelry sets, maybe different sets to wear, and stuff like that, so that you're prepped and primed for the occasion. Another thing would just be like the build authors to look at, because there's a lot of tanking builds out there, and it's important to know which one's what. Starting off, don't look at Zynode if you intend to do veteran content. It's nothing against the guy, he seems nice, but like, his builds are not suited for like doing good in veteran content. Maybe you want to do a normal trial every once in a while, but don't really mind if your group's not getting buffs. Maybe you just want to do normal dungeons, that's fine, but I would not recommend looking at Zynode. The main ones I'm going to go over, besides just kind of like a dunk on him, would be Alkost, Wohler, Liofa, Nefas, and Asian. Alkost builds are kind of iffy. They're a good starting point for a tank, but like, you are very likely going to want to respec away from them, because oftentimes they're just like yoinked from the skill editor, not the skill editor, the skill advisor, and it's not that great of a skill advisor, so I wouldn't recommend looking at Alkost for like a long-term tanking build. Wohler is kind of similar, like he's not really using the best optimized builds, but honestly his builds can get you going a long way. He still uses a magic regen tank, which might be a bit suspect if you want to do like harder veteran trials and harder veteran content, but honestly his skills are fine if you're just starting out, especially if you're just starting out like maybe normal trials and veteran base game dungeons. Like, his build is going to get you there. If you intend to do harder veteran content, or maybe you just want to go like be a beefy balance tank or something something tough like that, you're going to want to look at, in my opinion, Liofa, Nefas, and Asian. Liofa is probably one of the big names of tanking out there, especially for endgame content. Liofa is an endgame tank person. He does score running, he does veteran trial, stuff like that. He's a very good person to look at if you want to get a look at what tanks do and what tanks run for that kind of veteran content, like the buffs and the debuffs and the skills and the sets. So Liofa is real good to look at. Nefas is another one I would suggest. His builds on his YouTube channel are a little bit more specialized, because they're for every veteran trial. That is how it's going to be. If you intend to go into veteran trial tanking, like, you're going to have specialized builds for each trial. Maybe you're going to be swapping gear in the middle, maybe you're going to be swapping sets in the middle and stuff like that. And then you have Asian. Asian is the Asian god. The is the T3H. So Asian is a very good tanking player. He does veteran content, and he's also a really good theory crafter. Maybe you've heard of him before from his DPS things, maybe from his healer things, stuff like that, where he theory crafts a lot of content. He does veteran content, he does theory crafting. Asian's just a really good guy. His tanking builds are pretty classic for veteran content. He has real nice long discussions of it, and if you don't really like long discussions of it, in the not in the comments, in the description of his videos, he oftentimes has a link to a USAP build editor. I'm sorry, a UESP build editor build that'll just show you like what's the gear you want, or like a basic set of gear, and then the skills you want, and then in the video he goes into a little bit more in depth. So just a quick recap. Alt cost rate isn't really that great. Good for just starting out. Wooler isn't the greatest, but he'll get you far. I used a Wooler build for a good long while, and it did me pretty good for the content I did at the time, which was veteran base game dungeons and normal trials, and normal dungeons too. If you intend to do harder veteran content, or just want to get a look at the serious guys, or like what a good introduction to maybe balanced tanking or more serious tanking would be, Liofa for hard endgame content, or like the hardest endgame content, and to see what a score pushing tank runs. Nefas for really good trial specific setups. Like Nefas is also a score pusher. He runs with Mundus. Liofa runs with. And Asian, if you want to see that good old theory crafting goodness, and just overall really good builds. Like I think I haven't seen an Asian god build where the skills aren't really that great. Like all of his builds are very good, real high quality. Maybe outside a few minor nitpicks that a main of that role in class could build, but like Asian is just a real good starting point for endgame. Like his tank builds are real good. Yeah, and that kind of bleeds into a little bit tiny thing that I want to nip in the butt before the video, is that like you don't need to know all of this if you just intend to do normal stuff. This is just like bunches of good stuff to know. A little bit on races is that tanking is one of those things where it's actually very accommodating for your race. But if you want to be the best, if you want to have the best race at if you want to have the best tanking race, and make sure you have the best tanking race, Nord is very good for the resistances. Orc is real good if you're doing like certain fights where the off tank goes a little bit DPS-y. It's also very good for just corralling things because you go real fast. Like you have needs 10% added sprint speed. Yep, 10% added 10% movement speed to your sprint, so that's real good for corralling things. You also have sprint cost reduction, so that in Swift Jewels and the Steed Mundus is real good. Then Lizard has fallen a long way. Argonian is no longer like the easy thing it used to be. You can still make an Argonian and still do pretty good on it though. Imperial's nice for something like Warden, maybe Necro that has a steady influx of sustain, because Imperial fits really nicely into the steady sustain that Warden gives. Nord, I think I mentioned Nord a little bit, but like Nord is real nice. The resistances are super great for tanking. Like that extra physical resist is so good. Yeah. I don't think there's anything more to go over for tanking. I believe I went over all the main things to know, like, as a very beginner tank, like the build authors, how to level a tank, what is tanking, stuff like that. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you've learned something, and even if you didn't learn something, I hope you enjoyed it. I think I just said that. Yeah, a last minute thing, or right before I end off, just another thank you to Doc and Mumbles for helping me out with the tanking bits. You guys rule. Yeah, I will see you guys later. The live tanking session will hopefully be here soon, TM, if all goes according to plan. And yeah, I'll see you dudes later.